Done this
Tonight
before,
we're
huh?
hearing from neuroscientist Dr. Sarina Saturn in a talk entitled The Neuroscience of Resilience. You might not have expected to hear from a neuroscientist in the context of global humanitarian issues, but in fact, you could say it's essential to the work we do. Mercy Corps works in partnerships with communities to help with tough challenges like crises, conflict, and economic collapse. We work to build stability and strength from within. Neuroscience helps emergency response workers be more attuned to their own stress levels, as well as understand the effects of short and long-term trauma on people experiencing a natural or man-made disaster. Saturn is not all about fear and trauma. She used to spend, as she said, all her time on the dark side. Her focus has now turned to the more positive emotions like compassion and hope. Dr. Saturn received her Ph.D. in neuroscience from New York University. She was a postdoctoral scholar at Stanford, where she investigated the role of stress hormones on the brain's emotional circuitry, and continued postdoc work at UC Berkeley, where she began her attempts to bridge neuroscience with social psychology. Her lab investigates the biology underlying pro-social emotions and behaviors. Her research has been featured in the New York Times, NPR's Science Friday, Scientific American Mind, and other international outlets. Dr. Saturn is currently an assistant professor of psychology at Oregon State. Please welcome Dr. Sarina Saturn.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming here tonight. It's such a pleasure to see you all here. I'd like to start by thanking Mercy Corps for having me. I think the world of Mercy Corps, and I think all of you do too, doing such amazing work around the world. I also want to thank Megan, Melinda, and Danny for setting me up here. All my wonderful collaborators and students that allowed this work to happen, folks that gave us money to do research, and finally, all of you for coming here to this presentation. So Megan gave a lovely introduction, so I'll just go ahead and plunge in and talk about emotions. So I spent the last 20 years of my career studying the neurobiology of emotions. And as you all know, emotions come in a huge variety of flavors from the day we are born, and they will be around to the day we die. Emotions have essentially evolved to teach us the people, places, and things that have brought us well-being, and those things and places and people that has brought us harm. So it's a really strong evolutionary mechanism for us to remember those things that are important to us. Now, the strongest emotional response is fear and the stress response. I could argue that we'd all be dead by now if we didn't have a strong stress response. And as Megan mentioned, I spend a lot of my time on the pathology of emotions, like depression and stress and anxiety, because these are a lot easier to study, they're much more prevalent, and they're amazingly strong. What's really, really amazing, if you look at brains of a variety of species, especially mammalian species, you'll see the same general neurobiological architecture that I'm going to be talking about today. We all have different ways of dealing with the stress response and fear, as do other creatures, and we'll be talking about that today. So the stress response becomes in really, really handy during life and death situations. If we're doing some relief work, if our lives are in danger, if you're being chased by a dangerous animal. The stress response is also really handy during everyday situations, when we're going through traffic. If this room started shaking, we instinctually have this response to freeze and duck for cover. If we're going down a kind of a sketchy alley, we know to be wary. And everyday things like dealing with sickness and paying the bills and so forth are involving our stress response. And this is just an example that a lot of us like to tease our stress response as well, whether it's watching horror movies or going on roller coaster rides. And so it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to the stress response. So a little stress is just what we need to get our butts out of bed in the morning, do the things that we need to do in order to take care of ourselves and survive. Whether it's going to work, going to school, doing some exercise, and my biggest fear of all is public speaking. But as we all know, too much stress can be a very, very bad thing where it can completely override our sensibilities and make us feel like we're losing control. And stress has been shown to be especially bad if it's unpredictable, uncontrollable, or chronic, so happening for a very long time. So at the core of stress circuitry is the amygdala. The amygdala comes from the Greek word for almond, and it's depicted in these neural structures here. So they're in red. So on the left, if I slice my brain right down my head this way, and on the right, if I sliced it from ear to ear, and you can see the amygdala is poised right there in the core and the bottom of the brain. The amygdala is not just responsible for fear and stress, but it's also really key for anxiety, when we feel prejudice, when we're faced with various challenges in life, and so it's really rooted there and really, really key for our survival response. So how does the amygdala get activated during a stressful event? So it can come in through our sensory organs, whether it be our eyes or our ears. The amygdala can also be activated by our wild imaginations or watching the news. And the amygdala, in turn, has an emergency shortcut. And so it's positioned really nicely there to get our bodies to do what it needs to do appropriately to respond to that emotional event. There's also a shorter and a longer pathway. So there's an emergency shortcut that happens in the order of milliseconds before you are ever conscious of what happened. Because we really need that stress response to happen right away before we have time to evaluate it carefully. But there is a more nuanced, sophisticated pathway as well, feeding into the amygdala to inform its decisions. So this is a pretty detailed diagram. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you today to give you your money's worth and time's worth. But don't get stuck in the details. I just want you to get the general gist of what I'm trying to convey to you. And if you want any more details, don't hesitate to ask during the Q&A or contact me, and we can hash out some more of the details. But what to get from this slide is the amygdala, again here in red, is responsible for getting our bodies going during the stressful response. So you've probably heard of the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, the HPA axis. It also works through our sympathetic nervous system, which I'll be talking about a little bit more today. And this stress response is responsible for getting the stress hormones released from our adrenal glands. They sit on top of our kidneys, and they release things like cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, also known as epinephrine and norepinephrine, in order to do these stressful dealing events. So it makes your heart race, your blood pressure go through the roof, your lungs to bring in more air, gets your muscles mobilized to run or duck or crack your pants, scream, bloody murder, whatever you do when you're freaking out. And the stress hormones have a way of feeding back into the brain. So they're released. They have a lot of targets throughout the body. They also have a way of feeding back up to the brain. So what happens when our brains are under lots and lots of stress? So on the left is a neuron or a brain cell from a control brain, and on the right is from a very, very stressed brain. And what should jump out at you is that the stress neuron has grown and it makes new connections, so it's very, very elaborate. As you may know, that our dendrites, which are the receivers of information in our brain, have these spines, these protrusions, which are basically making new associations. So under chronic stress, our emotional center of our brain will grow and become more elaborate. Another key part of stress circuitry and also cognitive circuitry is the hippocampus. It comes from the word for seahorse, and it provides information about the context, the who, what, when, where, why, about our emotions and our general memories. And it's the same situation here where you have a control cell on the left and a stress cell on the right, and you can see the opposite pattern taking place. So stress actually causes cells in the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory, to shrink and wither away. And under really, really severe stress, they can actually die off. And if you're interested in that sort of work, my mentor at Stanford, Robert Sapolsky, has written a lot about what stress does to the brain. Another key area is the prefrontal cortex, which has really powerful control over the amygdala. It's responsible for high-order cognitive processes, such as analytical thinking, problem solving, making these really complicated associations in our head, and time travel. And what I mean by time travel is thinking about the past or predicting the future. The prefrontal cortex is what we believe as neuroscientists that makes us uniquely human. If you see all of these neural structures in other brains, especially mammalian brains, a lot of similarities as far as proportions go, but the humans are the ones that have the most elaborate and fancy prefrontal cortices. And this has allowed us to be very sophisticated, fancy monkeys, if you will, but it's a double-edged sword. Even though it allows us to be highly intelligent, it is also the root of our obsessions and our neuroticism and our rumination. And what chronic stress does to neurons in the prefrontal cortex is it actually causes this, what we call atrophy as well, the shrinkage of neurons. So the punchline is that stress causes neurons in your emotional areas to grow and make all these new elaborate associations, and areas in your cognitive centers responsible for concentration, learning, and memory to shrink and wither away. And I think we all know intuitively from our own lives what stress does to our bodies, and of course it comes about in different ways, kind of depending on what Mother Nature has decided to give to you. As we all know, when you're under stress, it's hard to concentrate, it's hard to sleep well. Some of us have skin problems, whether it be acne, psoriasis, eczema. It could go to your heart and lead to heart disease. Type 2 diabetes can be brought about by lots of stress. Reproductive issues. Immune system, as you know, when you're under stress, you're much, much more likely to get colds and flus, and you're also going to have a slower recovery time from injury. And so countless things happen to the body after lots of stress. So how can we fight stress? So today we're talking a bit about resilience. And resilience has a lot of definitions from field to field, but it really centers around this idea of having these high levels of positivity and well-being in the face of significant adversity. Resilience can be thought of bouncing back, if you will, and this capacity to have this rapid recovery after negative events happen in our lives, whether they be trauma or hardships. We know that resilient people do experience negative affect, so it's not that they're immune from experiencing these things, but it doesn't persist. And they also can profit from the information provided by the negative affect. Resilient people can also have this capacity for making meaning in response to these stressful events. So we probably recognize how Christopher Reeve, after dealing with paralysis, was a champion for research to help other people who've experienced a similar situation. And our beloved Malala Yousafzai, who basically just won the Nobel Prize, champion for education, shot in the head by the Taliban, but that didn't stop her. She's still fighting forward, and so she's really the epitome of resilience. So, a lot of studies in neuroscience have shown that people who are resilient have this rapid recovery in their biology. So their amygdala doesn't get activated nearly as much. Their prefrontal cortex will really go online. Stress hormones not as profound. Stronger immune systems, faster recovery, and actually disease progression has been shown to be slower in people who are resilient. This is a slide from health psychology, just looking at resilience and illness, also thought of as hardiness. So if you see under low stress, we're all in this together. But when high stress comes about, you really see this divide between resilient people and people who are not resilient, in that they get sick a lot easier and a lot more frequently. We also know that resilient people are protected from developing psychopathology. So going through traumatic events can easily lead to PTSD if you're not resilient. Also depression, anxiety, panic, and phobias. So after all that doom and gloom, how can we build resilience? Well, one way we can build resilience is what we call pro-social behaviors. And these are actions that benefit other people. And one message I want to bring across to you is that social connectedness is the key to bouncing back. This is some work looking at people who are socially isolated, and it's a pretty geeky slide, but basically looking at tens of thousands of genes. Research has shown that in people who are socially isolated versus those who are heavily integrated have a completely different genetic profile by their gene expression. So people who are highly isolated are going to have more genes that activated that lead to cardiovascular disease, cancer, and even neurodegeneration. And you see a downregulation of genes involved in these promoters of fighting off bacteria, fighting off viruses. And the same profile has been shown for all of these similar things. So it's not just, no one is immune, if you will. And if you, let's say, are under lots and lots of trauma or really low down on the socioeconomic ladder, all of these things that have difficulty in life can bring the same pattern of inflammatory gene responses. And so this transcriptional reprogramming will occur basically by a subset of our white blood cells. This is off a big field bringing together neuroscience and immunology and psychology to basically study how our emotions can affect our biology. So we know not to live by being socially isolated. How should we live? And what is the true nature of happiness? There's one camp that believes that we should be hedonic. And this was a big movement, especially several decades ago, to just be selfish and to really just care about yourself, but to also pursue happiness for yourself by accumulating lots and lots of happy experiences and just pursuing that and devoting your life to that. And that's different from what we call eudaimonic. And this is the idea that true happiness comes from not by having these happy experiences just for yourself, but by dedicating your life to the happiness of others and really the betterment of the world. And this is work done by Steve Cole and Bart Fredrickson. And this is basically this idea. By looking at people, asking them how hedonic or eudaimonic they are, and also looking at their well-being, and doing a very similar profile where you take a sample of their blood and look at their genetic profile. This is what you find. So when you look at psychology, you just ask these people, well, how happy are you? You'll see that the hedonic and eudaimonic people are in the same range of happiness. But if you look at those tens of thousands of genes, you see the opposite pattern. So that people who are eudaimonic are actually going to have a better well-being profile in their blood and in their gene expression, in that they're going to have most of this antiviral and antibody defenses against disease. So at the level of psychology, eudaimonic and hedonic people are in the same boat. But if you look at the immune cell genomes, you're actually going to see this opposite divide, where devoting yourself to the betterment of the world and making other people happy is actually going to be healthy for you. This has also been shown in epidemiology, where volunteers have been shown to live longer than non-volunteers. But this is only true if you're doing it for other-oriented reasons, not self-serving reasons. And a lot of my work has been devoted to studying the neurochemistry of resilience. And so this is just a really quick, dense slide where I tried to kind of summarize the prosocial nervous system. And I'm going to focus on 3 key neurotransmitter systems. There are others out there that play a role as well, but I just want to simplify things for you. So what is dopamine, which you probably have heard of before? Dopamine will cause your brain to light up when you're eating delicious food, when you win a big prize, even during sexual pleasure. All of these things that cause that wonderful rush, that's dopamine. And what's amazing is that both voluntary and mandatory charitable acts will actually activate your dopaminergic circuitry, your reward circuitry, in the same way that it lights up during self-relevant rewards. So these regions that secrete dopamine will light up when altruistic choices are prevailing over selfish ones, when people are cooperating with each other, and also during fairness as well. And I just wanted to show you a quick video just to illustrate how fairness is unique across many creatures.
Give it a grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests her rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
So that was a fun video, and it also illustrates how it's this innate drive for fairness. It's just so instinctual, and you don't need a complicated brain to figure that out. And we know that when people are pro-social, so if you look at a bunch of pro-social people and a bunch of selfish people in a scanner, we're going to see more activity light up in the reward circuitry just during baseline. And this is going to see, you're going to see the opposite pattern if you put people who are very individualistic. And compassion meditation, and I'll give a little quick teaser about meditation later, also will activate these dopamine circuits. Serotonin, I'm sure you've all heard about. It's really key for mood, but also sleep, appetite, libido. It's also been shown in the neuropsychological literature to be really key for fairness, affiliation, and moral judgment. You can boost levels naturally because we all know that they're the key target for antidepressants, but there are lots of ways to just get it going naturally with exercise and eating well. Sunlight, or get a sunlight, I know we're here in Oregon, massage, and also just remembering happy events. And another key favorite, and my favorite neurochemical is oxytocin, which doubles as a hormone and a neurotransmitter, and it's been shown to support affiliative behavior in a variety of species, everything from rodents to humans. It's really, really key for pair bond formation, for devotion over the years of one's lifetime, parental care, and biobehavioral synchrony, so how our brains and our bodies are in sync with the people that we love. Studies have shown that if you give oxytocin to people, it's going to dramatically increase their generosity, how much eye contact they make, how much they trust you, and even the ability to read other people's emotions. If I study how much oxytocin is just flooding through your system naturally, it's going to directly correlate with how much you're bonding with the people you love. So it's been shown with parent bonding behaviors, not just with mother and child, but also father and child. Feelings of romantic love and trust. And this also goes to strangers, so how much empathy and generosity you express towards strangers. This is actually my baby at home. Get my oxytocin going during my talk. So oxytocin has also been shown to fight stress in the most potent way. And this is Mother Nature's way of making love fight stress and build resilience, because it's shown to actually modulate their stress hormone levels by directly interfering with the cortisol response. It'll inhibit cardiovascular responses to stress by calming you down, and that's like the ultimate chill pill. And it'll actually lower how much your amygdala responds to emotional stimuli. So butterfly work is what causes individual differences in resiliency and emotions. And a lot of it is due to genetics, or genetic predisposition. So genetic variations are basically a way of having us all be a little different, and they can have a profound impact on our neurochemistry. Polymorphisms is just a fancy word for many forms, and they're ubiquitous across many species, and not just animals, but also in the flower kingdom and so forth. Polymorphisms dictate our blood type. In the ant colony, who's going to be royalty, who's going to be king and queen. So it'd be a fiasco if every single bee in the colony wanted to be a queen, and Mother Nature has a way of sorting that out. And before I show you this data, I just want to emphasize that variety is the spice of life, and life would be really boring if we all looked the same and acted the same. Neurochemical polymorphisms in the serotonin system have been related to social sensitivity and emotional reactivity. And in the dopamine system, it's been shown to be related to reward-related behaviors. So people who seek rewards, whether it be through substances or adrenaline junkies and so forth. So with serotonin, I'll just go over this quickly, it relates to how much your amygdala responds to emotional stimuli, and also the propensity to develop depression and anxiety. It will also lead to a higher stress reactivity in some people. And there's been stuff in the pro-social domain suggesting that it would expand to pro-social tendencies. So much so if you tweak people's serotonin behavior in the laboratory by tryptophan depletion, all of a sudden they get very selfish and depressed, and it's really interesting to see this divide when you're kind of so overcome with your own distress, it's really hard to step out of your own pain and to tend to others. Dopamine, as I mentioned, has been shown to basically seek reward, and so genetic studies have shown that it has related to substance abuse, gambling, overeating, but even altruism, kind of pertaining to this basically derive reward from being a good person. So I studied the oxytocin receptor, which is distributed throughout the body and the brain, really key in the amygdala and the heart, and also in these areas of the calming system, which I'll go over later. We were interested in how it relates to stress reactivity, so we basically used the startle paradigm, doing white noise bursts through the headphones, and looked at how much people's hearts reacted to this task. And what we essentially found is a divide by genotype. So we get one allele from our mothers, one from our fathers, and there are various combinations that we can have. And individuals that inherited 2 G alleles in this particular region of the oxytocin receptor gene displayed less stress reactivity, so by beats per minute in their heart, than people with 1 or 2 copies of the A allele. We also asked people, well, how much do you freak out during a crisis and emergency? And we found the same divide. So individuals that had more physiological stress reactivity by genotype also reported having less stress reactivity during emergencies. And so we're interested in how this related to prosociality, since oxytocin is really key for stress, but also for this social glue. And we asked people, well, how empathetic you are. So this scale has been around forever and looks at facets including empathic concern, so having these tender concern feelings for people less fortunate, and also perspective taking, this ability to put yourself in other people's shoes. And what we found is that individuals in the GG group, the same ones that had less physiological and self-reported stress reactivity, actually reported having more other-oriented, interpersonal, empathetic behavior. We also did this task that was devised by Simon Baron-Cohen, happens to be Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin. He studies autism. So interestingly, and we can talk about this in the Q&A if you're interested, there's a link between oxytocin and autism. At least some people think there is. And in non-clinical population, if you give people oxytocin, they actually perform better on this task. So I thought it'd be fun to try some of these on all of you. So please raise your hand if you think this man looks jealous. How about panicked, arrogant, and hateful? Well done. How about this bloke? Is he alarmed, shy, hostile, anxious? Ding, ding, ding. Let's do one last example. Is this woman grateful, flirtatious, hostile, or disappointed? Well done. This room is flooding with oxytocin. Very impressed. Best performance I've seen yet. So we found that by genotype again that individuals with the GG essentially did perform better on this task. And we were both amused and dismayed to see that this came out as a parody for scientific breakthroughs that the world will regret, and that empathy gene has been found. But genes are not our destiny, and I'll go into that a bit more later. I also wanted to tell you about this other study that we did where we basically had strangers view these people listening to their romantic partner talk about a time of suffering in their lives. They watched these silent video clips and looked for these prosocial cues like leaning, eye contact, nodding, just all these compassionate cues. Let me just show you how that looks. So here's one individual. Again, he's listening to his partner talk about a time of suffering in her life. And the readers are basically looking at how intently he was gazing, how compassionate he seems, and how concerned. Here's another fellow. Hopefully this isn't your partner or you. You can see he's just really not paying attention to what she's saying. No body contact, no eye contact, kind of just fumbling around. And here's a very compassionate person with a lean forward, a lot of gestures, and just looking really warm. Here's another very pro-social partner who looks very concerned and compassionate when listening to her partner talk about a time of suffering. And so we had complete strangers view these video clips and rate these cues, and I just have one more example for you. And so you can see this goes, we looked at both genders, and she looks very uncomfortable. And again, it could be this idea that she's so overcome with her own distress that it's really hard for her to open up and to listen to her partner talk about a time of suffering. And we found that this GG group, the same group that was found to be more empathetic and read emotions better and have less physiological and self-reported stress reactivity, were actually rated by complete strangers to be more pro-social. And others have found the same polymorphism to relate to things like autism, sensitive parenting, and also how the hypothalamus and the amygdala react. And a key implication is that genetic variability in our neurochemical systems can contribute to these complex individual differences that we see. And when I first saw my data, I cried and cried. And I didn't cry because I knew we were going to get all these hot publications and get a lot of media. I cried because I genotyped myself and I'm in the A group. But this allowed me to do a lot of introspection to realize all the obstacles I had to overcome, and how a lot of those obstacles were overcome by oxytocin and lots of love. It also teaches us that we need to understand that everyone has unique obstacles to achieving inner peace and prosociality. So some of us have a harder time making eye contact than other people. Some of us have a hard time stopping eating, or some of us freak out more, and a lot of that is due to Mother Nature coloring our emotional states and traits. And it's important to understand that instead of coming down so hard on people. I'm going to go over this very quickly, but in the individual differences, our caregivers make a big deal as well. So we're also interested in how important early life experiences are, and we're finding that people who have strong parents basically have less stress reactivity, they give more affection, they receive more affection, they're actually more pro-social. So we have this task where our research assistant accidentally drops a bunch of stuff on the floor, and it's really the group that receives more affection in their daily lives that help with this task and help pick that stuff up. Early life bonding is key for gratitude, altruism, trust, love, and interpersonal support. And it's also key for self-compassion. And so a lot of people say if we treated our friends like we treat ourselves, we probably wouldn't have any friends left. We can be so hard on ourselves and beat ourselves up. And self-compassion, we're finding, will be boosted if people have caregivers that treat them really, really kindly early in life. And we have data basically showing that self-compassion in adults will relate to resilience. So by boosting your self-compassion, and there are ways to do that, you can become more resilient. It'll also help you regulate your stress better. You'll have better health and sleep. We're also finding that self-compassionate people tend to be more pro-social. So if you can be kind to yourself, you can be kind to others. And it also leads to post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress. And happiness is also really key. And the estimates with happiness is what we're guessing is the story with resilience, where genetics basically dictate about 50% of who we are. But genetics aren't our destiny necessarily. There's a lot of wiggle room there. Our external circumstances, about 10%, our environment, our caregivers, and so forth. So all of the stuff that I've shown you, all this data that we generated showing what relates significantly, doesn't mean that it's dictating everything. And what's heartening is about 40% is what we decide to do with our lives, our actions and our thoughts. You can also build resiliency with emotion regulation. There's cognitive restructuring that's really, really key. You can do this through therapy or just doing it at home, and I'm happy to elaborate on that by doing cognitive reappraisal, which is basically looking for the silver lining in things, looking at the world as the glass is half full. And mindfulness and loving kindness meditation have also been shown to get your prefrontal cortex going and lower your amygdala responsivity. Movement's really key for resiliency as well. Exercise, you've probably heard it before, actually can generate more neurons, cause antioxidant activity, and it's been shown to ward off dementia, you name it. Yoga has been really key for dealing with trauma and hardship. Dance, and whatever moves you. We all have different ways, but movement has been shown to be a key way of kind of shaking it off and moving those difficult emotions through your body. And we can also build our resiliency by witnessing compassion. And this is what I'm studying now these days, by looking at our moral exemplars, or our pro-social role models. So I study what's called moral elevation, and this is a specific emotional state that's triggered by looking at great acts of compassion. So elevation can be elicited by looking at great acts of generosity, kindness, forgiveness, or gratitude. And it's often unexpected, very open-hearted, very, very kind. And we've had moral exemplars in society from the beginning of time. And we often think about these people who have profound virtue and how much they move us by their moral excellence. But neuroscience and psychology has very little to say about these other praising family of emotions. In the laboratory, if you induce moral elevation, it's been shown to actually dramatically increase altruism. And this degree of altruism is going to correlate with how much people say they're feeling this desire to help others, and also what's happening in their bodies, this warmth in the chest and a lump in the throat. I was especially inspired by this study where they induced moral elevation in mothers who are nursing. And after elevation induction, they basically just started lactating. And this basically, we know that oxytocin is really key for lactation and milk letdown. And these women who were in the elevation condition were also more likely to cuddle and bond with their children, something that also relates to oxytocin. And so we set out to study the biology underlying elevation, first focusing on the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve that basically comes out of, it starts in your brainstem, and it's intimately related to both stress reactivity and oxytocin. And it's key for the parasympathetic activity to calm down the heart. The vagus nerve is thought of as one of the greatest mind-body connections. It comes from the word for wandering, also called the love nerve. We know it's really, really intimately related to oxytocin and caregiving. It also helps modulate our social engagement system, as I mentioned. So eye contact, leaning, nodding, and it also has a role in some of our viscera as well. Some of us naturally have low vagal tone, and that's been shown to relate to the propensity to develop heart disease or obesity or psychiatric disorders. And some of us are lucky enough to have high vagal tone, and that's going to lead to more positive emotion, appearing more trustworthy, having more pro-social children, and actually better support networks. So you might have heard of the sympathetic nervous system, which is what I briefly went over at the beginning of this talk. It's called our fight or flight system. Really, really key during emotionally responsive, when it's really time to rise to action. It causes our heart to race, our blood to pump. Parasympathetic nervous system also innervates many of our organs and has what we call opposing effects. So it basically causes our heart to slow down, our breathing to become more shallow. It's also called our rest or digest system. So it's really, really activated when we're just sitting on the couch or laying down. Also helps get our body back down to baseline after an emergency sympathetic response. And so this illustration of the vagus nerve is basically, we have in green is the sympathetic system, and you see it going up there to the sinoatrial node, also known as the SA node up here. And here's the vagus nerve, which again in the medulla comes out of the brainstem, and it also goes to this pacemaker of the heart. Heart's almost like a glorified neuron, if you will, beating according to the signals it's given, and this is kind of the electrical signal right here. And so this is showing that both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system will innervate the pacemaker of the heart at the very same location. So I typically show our elevation-inducing stimuli when I give talks, but I find this particular Mercy Corps video to be very elevating, and it really will give you that sense of elevation. motivates you like it does for me, and it really moves you to see other people helping other people. And for some of us, it'll bring a lump in our throat, and we feel this warmth in our chest, sometimes tears in our eyes, and really it's this desire to help other people and to be a better person. And so in our laboratory, we basically show a neutral baseline video, and then we induce either elevation or amusement. And we wanted to use another positive motion that's also very social, so you can really compare and contrast what this specific emotional state is about. So I thought I would show you a clip from our amusement stimuli as well.
Nighttime. Nighttime! 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 I'm going to give you nighttime, nighttime. You want to play?
I don't know. I don't seem to have a lot of luck with women. I mean, I'm kind and caring and... There's a mystery there.
Alan! 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 Neck and legs, look at that. Stop looking at it!
It's fine, just keep a lookout.
Whoa! Where did all these come from? You know me, lads, I can't leave them an audience. Alan! 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 I'm Wolverine! Ah! Saber-tooth! Wolverine! Saber-tooth! Wolverine! Saber-tooth! Wolverine! Saber-tooth! You can't get me a Wolverine! Saber-tooth! Tuck it in, you know I'm working nights.
Alright, good. This fella in the giraffe walks into a bar. Giraffe goes to sleep on the floor. Barber says, "Oi, what's that lying there?" Fella says, "It's not a lion, it's a giraffe."
Just like the open wide, sir. Going anywhere nice on your holidays? yeah, don't try and talk when my hands are in your mouth. I'm thinking of going abroad this year. Dudley, who's got a family in the zoo over there. You got kids? Please don't talk when my hands are in your mouth. Do the fill in here, actually, at the back. Is it mainly bananas you eat? No, I won't tell you again, so please don't try to speak when I'm working television. Right, I'm trying to achieve good taste. Almost done, just need to smell your breath. Oh, that's right.
I'm glad you enjoy that. Now think about how different amusement felt in your body and your brain and elevation. They both make you feel really good, but they cause different things to happen. And what we essentially found is that elevation will boost the vagus nerve. So it'll cause more parasympathetic activity, known as the vagal brake. And so we don't see this with amusement, which is also a positive social emotion. And so moral elevation has been shown to boost this vagus activity. What's interesting is that we also found that elevation increases sympathetic activity as well. So it also caused our participants' hearts to increase, their heart rate, and their skin conductance was also enhanced by this particular emotional state. And in looking at the literature, we discovered that this is really rare, where you both have parasympathetic and sympathetic activity on at the same time. They are usually on at different levels, but when you have them kind of both ramped up, it's under really rare circumstances that are involved around social sensitivity and arousal. So all of our immersive care workers would feel both this call to action to help other people, but feel this distress, but also feel this parasympathetic social bonding, social engagement system kick in. So we see this in the literature when people are caring for children. So if you're a parent, you probably know that parenting involves stress, but it also involves lots of tender, loving care. Social crying is really key, and sexual activity. So all of these situations that involve some arousal, but also some social sensitivity. We also look at the medial prefrontal cortex. This is a region of the brain that's been shown to regulate the autonomic nervous system, so that's the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Also really key for emotion regulation and social cognition. Previous work has shown that activity in this region of the brain will also relate to vagus nerve activity as well. So we use functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which is basically looking at neural activity. It's just like fMRI looking at blood flow oxygenation levels. And what we found was that the prefrontal cortex activity would actually go offline during moral elevation. So this area is really key for emotion regulation, but previous work that is also really key for ego awareness, and when you're basically evaluating yourself in a social setting. So again, this is what makes us very social, intellectual creatures. This is the part of the brain that makes us uniquely human. But it can sometimes get in the way. And sometimes when we're wrapped up in our own ego or evaluating a situation, it's hard to really tend to other people. We found that this deactivation will relate to how inspired our participants felt, how much admiration and hope they were reporting, their sympathy, compassion, and also this desire to help other people. And so this may relate to alterations in ego awareness, as I mentioned, and our social evaluations. This key area is really pivotal for judgments as well. So it's almost as if we're kind of step outside of our judgmental, egotistical mind. We're able to kind of let our neurotic brain shut off, and this allows these emotions to wash over our body and also over our brain and allow us to really want to step outside of ourselves and to help other people. This key area is also involved in time travel, and time travel, as I mentioned, is reliving the past or projecting the future, and so it seems to bring people to the present moment. This is a dense slide, and all I want you to get from this is that people who receive affection on a daily basis are going to be more boosted by elevation, and that they're going to feel more compassion, optimism about humanity, and this desire to help other people. They'll also report more stuff going on in what they feel in their chest and in their heart as well. So, are there magic pills for resiliency? Oftentimes when I give a talk, people ask about a bottle of oxytocin to pass around the room. Because all those studies I showed, people actually snorted it, and they were all kind and lovey-dovey and very generous, giving all their money away. And could we just give oxytocin bombs or wisteria? Everything would be all better, right? Actually, it's not that easy. Giving artificial oxytocin has also been shown to dramatically increase gloating and envy and ethnocentrism, so thinking that your ethnicity is superior to other people. So it's not this warm, fuzzy blanket that we can just pass around to everyone. It's really, really smart in that naturally it'll boost all of these wonderful pro-social behaviors, but it's kind of a threshold, and it's the self-other differentiation, and it can also cause some epigenetic modifications as well. And if you're interested in what I mean by that, feel free to bring that up in the Q&A, because you can't change your genes, but life experiences can change how your genes are turned on and off. And by giving oxytocin artificially, you can cause some of those bad side effects. But how can we get more resilient? So what I hope you get from this talk is that by building your social bonds with loved ones, but also with complete strangers, you're going to become more resilient. By witnessing compassionate acts by moral elevation, and performing compassionate and altruistic acts, that's not just going to release your oxytocin, but also your dopamine and your serotonin levels. We're finding so much data, and it's almost accidentally with affection. If you give an affection freely on a daily basis, not just to your loved ones, but to everyone, hugs are really, really key, and they're very free, and they've been shown to dramatically increase people's well-being and resiliency, and also their tendency to be good people to others. And also by nourishing and centering our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. In whatever way works for you, it's really, really key to find a way to unplug and decompress in a way that really, really sings to you. And everyone we can fight all of that damaging stuff that stress does to our bodies and our brains by boosting pro-social acts and by building these compassion and altruistic acts into our daily lives. And being pro-socially is amazingly beneficial to both your body and your brain, and being good to others is also really good for you. And so with that, I'll stop there and thank you for your attention.